Aotearora, guys, and welcome to another English lesson for 4th grade high school students. My name is Davor Černi and I'll be your teacher today. Today we'll take a trip to Aotearora. Today's journey will consist of a little bit of reading, watching and listening, and also comparing symbols of foreign countries with symbols of Croatia. And of course, exploring the culture of a foreign country. Let's get ready. Get your equipment ready. Please feel free to pause the video at any time, and you can find all the links needed for this lesson in the video description below. Let's start. Can you guess from these photos what is our destination today? Well, our destination today is New Zealand. Let's start with a little quiz. You can pause the video and follow the link and do the quiz. Check out how much you know about New Zealand. Welcome back. Let's continue. Now you're going to watch a promotional video about New Zealand, and during this video try to write down the elements that make up the basis of the Maori culture. Write down these names in the Maori language.
Ko rangi nui e tū iho nei.
Rangi nui is our sky father.
Ko tāne mahuta, nāna te ngahiri.
Tāne mahuta is our forest.
Ko papatuanuku e takoto nei.
Papatuanuku is our earth mother.
Ko Tangaroa, nāna te moana, ki usa. Ko ngā awa me ngā roto.
Tangaroa is our ocean, our rivers, our lakes.
Ko Aotearoa, tō tātou ukai.
New Zealand is our home. It is precious. Everyone who lives and travels here has a responsibility to look after it.
Tiaki means to care for people and place. The Tiaki promise is a commitment to care for New Zealand, for now and for future generations.
To care for land, sea and nature, treading lightly and leaving no trace.
To travel safely, showing care and consideration for all.
To respect culture, travelling with an open heart and mind.
While travelling in New Zealand, follow the Tiaki promise. Act as a guardian.
Protect and preserve our home.
Help us care for New Zealand.
Welcome back. Hope you enjoyed the video. Let's check if you have managed to write down all the things that you were asked to do. First one mentioned was Rangi Nui, who is our sky father, so it represents the sky. Then you heard about Tane Mahuta, which is actually our forest. Next one was Papatuanuku, simply our Earth Mother. Then we had Tangaroa, which is our water. It represents all the oceans, rivers, and lakes. And the last one mentioned was the Tiaki, which is a promise that you will take care of the people and place now and for the future. So where is New Zealand? As you can see from this map, New Zealand is far away from everything. From Asia, North America and South America it takes up to 12 hours, and if you're in Europe it will take up to 24 hours to get here. There aren't many direct flights and tickets are quite expensive. But when you get there you'll find a variety of awesome landscapes which are very easy to reach. Geographically, New Zealand is lying in the southwest Pacific and it consists of two main islands, which are called the North Island and the South Island. There is also a Stewart Island and many smaller islands which lie offshore. How old is New Zealand? Well, the oldest rocks are over 500 million years old. New Zealand was part of this supercontinent called Gondwanaland. This massive supercontinent started to split up about 160 million years ago, and New Zealand separated from it about 85 million years ago. So from gentle sandy beaches to wild rugged coastline, you can do almost anything in New Zealand, and it covers 15,000 kilometers of beautiful and varied coastline. New Zealand in some ways is similar to Croatia because it has a lot of intact natural beauties. If you want to learn more about New Zealand geography and geology, please follow the link or the QR code on this page. My friends went to New Zealand and all I got was, well, this was an old t-shirt sign that used to be popular before somebody came up with the phrase "keep calm and carry on." And people were buying these t-shirts as souvenirs for their friends and families. Some 30 years ago, if a friend or a family member went to New Zealand, you probably would have got a t-shirt like that. But things have changed. What are typical Croatian souvenirs? So, you can pause the video and write down in your notebook some of the typical Croatian souvenirs that you can think of. So, this is what I came up with. Licitarsko srce, paprenjak, maslinovo ulje, glagoljica, kravata, morčić, šibenska kapa. Please follow the link and read about some of the popular New Zealand souvenirs and write them down in your notebook. What are some of the New Zealand souvenirs? So if your friends go to New Zealand, this is something you might get as a souvenir from there. All Blacks jersey from the famous rugby national team. Maybe a Buzzy Bee, a toy for your kids. Maybe a funny New Zealand t-shirt. Or a kiwi soft toy, since another word they use for New Zealanders is kiwis. Of course, New Zealand is famous for the making of Lord of the Rings movies, so you might get a memorabilia from the set or the movie. Something for the sweet tooth, some manuka honey, maybe if you like art, maybe some Maori art, or some merino wool jumper, since New Zealand is also famous for its sheep herding and production of wool. Maybe we'll get some New Zealand sweets, some wine, which creates a connection between New Zealand and Croatia, maybe some wood products, or something else from this list. All these souvenirs tell us something about past and the present of the country we are visiting. In our little presentation, we are now going to take a look at the past of New Zealand. What is the past of New Zealand? First word you can see here is Indigenous. Have you heard this word before? Do you know what it means? Something indigenous means produced or growing, living, or occurring natively or naturally in a particular region or environment. Australians have a famous word called Aborigine, which actually means something like originally born. Can you think of any synonyms for the word Indigenous? So synonyms could be Aboriginal, autochthonous, born, domestic, endemic, native. Can you think of any antonyms? Imported, introduced, transplanted, alien, exotic, foreign, strange, expatriate, or immigrant. So, who are the natives in New Zealand? Who are the indigenous people of New Zealand? They are called Maori. And they belong to Polynesian group of nations. They gave themselves the name Maori to distinguish themselves from the settlers. And who were the settlers? The immigrants to New Zealand. New Zealand was the last large and livable place in the world to be discovered. The first settlers coming to New Zealand were Dutch, or to be precise, it was in 1642 when a European sighted New Zealand. This European explorer was a Dutchman called Abel Tasman. He sailed in search of vast southern continent which many Europeans thought might exist in the South Pacific. Shortly afterwards, a Dutch mapmaker gave the name Nieuw Zeeland to the land Tasman had discovered. Then, some 127 years later, the British and the French came. The English navigator, Captain James Cook, so the famous James Cook, sighted New Zealand on 6 October 1769 and landed at a place we now know as Poverty Bay 2 days later. He drew detailed and accurate map of the country and wrote about the Maori people. His first encounter with Maori was not successful. A fight broke out in which some Maori were killed. However, after this, Cook and his men had friendly contact with Maori. Then the French explorers came, and the number of immigrants grew. One of the most important documents and events in the history of New Zealand is the Treaty of Waitangi. This is an agreement made in 1840 between representatives of the British Crown and more than 500 Maori chiefs. It resulted in the declaration of British sovereignty over New Zealand by Lieutenant Governor William Hobson in May 1840. Most chiefs signed a Maori language version of the treaty. The English and Maori language versions held different meanings, and Maori and Europeans therefore had different expectations from the treaty's terms. Ever since, resolution of these differences has presented New Zealand with challenges. If you want to learn more about the history of New Zealand, feel free to follow the link and explore. So over to you now. This is a little puzzle activity. We have a sentence that has to be joined. It's jumbled up, so your assignment is to put it together and write it down in your notebook. And here is the solution. The present is constantly trying to remake the past for its own purposes. People so keenly feel that they are the product of their origins that they tend always to find in those origins what they choose to see rather than what is, in fact, there. This is an interesting topic to have a discussion, maybe with your history teacher. So let's do some vocabulary work. On this slide, you see a list of words which you have to connect with their definitions. So please pause the video and try to do the task. I hope you have managed to connect all the words with their definitions. So here are the answer. Faithfully, in a loyal manner. Historian is an expert in or student of history. Keenly, in an eager or enthusiastic manner. Evidence, the available body of facts or information indicating whether a belief or proposition is true or valid. Detect, discover or identify. Fallacies, a mistaken belief. Unconsciously, without realizing or being aware of one's actions. Limit, a restriction on the size or amount of something permissible. Origins, the point or place where something begins. And distortions, the action of giving a misleading account or impression. What I would like you to do now is follow the link or use the QR code and do the task in this digital app, in which you have to use these words in the context. Here are some more interesting facts about the New Zealand past. So, linking the people to the land. Many Maori traditions tell of the Polynesian settlers from Hawaii who reached the coast in canoes about 700 years ago. But there are also myths and legends of earlier beings, such as the first human to be created. Through these stories, tribes can trace a long relationship with the land and with the different regions they live in. So you have characters like Tane, Hina, Hune, and Hine, Maui, Kupe, Toite, Huatahi. So these are all the first people of New Zealand. So you can follow the link and learn about New Zealand past, about its myths and legends. Of course, one thing we mustn't forget when talking about New Zealand, and that is tattooing. This is an important part of the Maori tradition and culture. Maori call the tattooing process tamoko and kirituhi. The difference is in who's performing the tattooing and on whom he is doing it. So tamoko can be done only by Maori people, on Maori people. While kirituhi can be done either by Maori or somebody else, on, of course, Maori or somebody else. Tattoos are definitely complex, and in the past they were really painful because they were originally done using the method of scarification. It means that cuts were made on human body with something like a chisel, and then paint was inserted into these fresh scars. They are definitely sacred, and they differ according to the social status of a person. Today they represent the tradition and have definitely become a form of art. The focal point of Maori tattooing was generally the face. Men had full facial tattoos, while women only had their chin, lips, and nostrils tattooed. Some Maori also had other parts of the body tattooed, such as their back, buttocks, and legs. Women were more often known to tattoo their arms, neck, and thighs. The patterns are, of course, numerous. Here is an example. This is a pattern called pakati. This is a dog skin cloak, and a person wearing this tattoo is probably a representative of warriors, or they can represent battles, courage, and strength. If you want to learn more about Maori tattooing, you can use this link, and it actually takes you to a web page of a very famous tattoo parlor in New Zealand. There you can learn more about the whole tattooing process and its history in New Zealand. Also, we would like to thank this tattoo shop for allowing us to use some of their photos in our video. These are some of the examples of what tattooing and tattoos look like today. And this brings us to the last topic I would like us to cover today, and that is the connection between New Zealand and Croatia. The first settlers that came from Croatia to New Zealand were the kauri gum diggers. So what is kauri gum? Well, the best way to describe it is to say that it is a kind of resin, smaller, that was believed to be precious. This kauri gum looked and felt like the new kind of gold, and since the living conditions in Croatia at the time were difficult, people fled. This resin was their promised future. Next, Croatian immigrants coming to New Zealand were farmers, winemakers, and fishermen who were just looking for a better life. From the 1920s to the 1990s, we had later immigrants which were coming in waves to New Zealand. Unfortunately, Croatians who came to New Zealand also brought with them the negative parts of the life in Europe, like racism and cultural differences. Since every wave of immigrants came from a different period, their political and cultural backgrounds were different, which caused tension between them. Let's meet the Croatian immigrants to New Zealand. This is Nikola Nobilo. He was one of the New Zealand's most successful winemakers of the 1960s and 1970s, building a few wines on his Huapai farm into a winemaking dynasty. With his sons, Nobilo was one of the leaders of the transition from fortified wines to premium table wines, for which he established an international reputation. So, there are 3 reading activities here. You can complete them following these 3 links. Each reading activity requires a different reading strategy. So please feel free to pause the video and do the task. After you have read the story of Nikola Dom Nobilo, you're probably wondering, how does the story end? Well, here are the later years of his life. So Nicola lived on at Huapai after his retirement, in a Mediterranean-style stone chateau overlooking the vineyards with the name Dom Nobile, sandblasted over the doorway. He and Zuva renewed their wedding vows at the village church in Lombarda in 1993 and again in Huapai on their 60th wedding anniversary in 1999. Nicola joked that he had been married 3 times in his life, but always to the same woman. In 1994, he was made an OBE, which is an Order of the British Empire, for the services to the viticulture industry. Finally forced by ill health to move to Henderson, he died at Te Atatu on 29th August 2007. A few days after his 94th birthday. Nicola Nobilo was the last survivor of the pioneer Dalmatian winemakers who transplanted their winemaking traditions to the other side of the world. This brings us to the end of our lesson today. If you want to read more stories about the people who built the modern New Zealand, you can follow the link. It might give you an insight into why is New Zealand what it is today, and an insight into its multiculturalism. Over to you. Following the 2 links, you have 2 tasks. You can either make a class presentation of your virtual journey to New Zealand using this itinerary, or you can use any other itineraries from the website. Or you can choose one of the stories from Myths and Legends of New Zealand and report back to class. Here is just a quick peek at the links that we used in this lesson. Of course, you can find all these links in the description below the video. If you want to learn more about New Zealand today, you can watch the second part of this lesson on YouTube following the link. Thank you to Encyclopedia of New Zealand, Peter and Yen, New Zealand Film Commission, Tourism of New Zealand, and the Zealand Tattoo Shop. Once again, thank you for your attention. Stay safe, be responsible. Bye.